Let's go out to the Boxer and Gerson guest line. On the line, of course, none other than Odyssey NFL insider Peter King, our favorite every week. Insider Calls brought to you by Old Spice. Men have skin too. Peter King, we hear that you're going to both of the AFC games this weekend, and we can only assume that's because you know the Packers are going to get rolled at Levi Stadium.
No, last weekend I went to 2 games. I went to Houston and I went to Detroit. And I like to try to go on weekends like this. I like to try to go to 2. And I haven't seen the Niners in a while. I haven't seen the Packers all year. And I just thought, man, I'd really like to go to the game. But getting from San Jose or San Francisco to Buffalo on Sunday in time for that game was going to be a challenge. So I just decided. And then, if one thing goes wrong, you miss the game entirely. So I just thought I would go to Baltimore and Buffalo instead.
In terms of the must-watch games, you would put Chiefs-Bills as number 1, and then logistically the Ravens game would fall next. But would you put the Buccaneers-Lions as the second most?
I wouldn't put the Ravens game second. I'd put the 49ers game second. Because I don't know how you could watch that game in Dallas last weekend and not think, hey, the Packers are going to give anybody right now a really, really good game. And, I don't think they're going to go in necessarily to Santa Clara and win that game. But, look, in the last 9 games, Jordan Love's got 21 touchdowns, 1 interception. This is a challenge right now that the Niners have in this game. You wouldn't think that a 7-1 would be a big challenge. I think it's going to be.
You mentioned those last 9 games. That's been all the talk with Jordan Love. Let me ask you, Peter, how has your perception of that player changed in the last 9 weeks?
Massively. Because, look, I during the course of the year, I've been, you're on this talk show, that talk show. So I've been on a couple out in Packer country. And, when Jordan Love wasn't playing well, I remember this one show I was on. I said, listen, you have to understand, I don't care how bad. Look, it's one thing if he, looks like, Todd Marinovich or something. But unless he's absolutely, totally terrible, then, he's going to get a second year. And I would predict under almost any circumstances he'd get a third because they just put too much into him. So I never thought that it was ever going to be one and done with him. But the last half of the season, it's convinced me that, honestly, both he and C.J. Stroud right now, if I'm making a list of the top 10 quarterbacks in football, both of those guys are going to be on it.
Well, C.J. Stroud to me is like Yo-Yo Ma, Peter, in terms of his excellence.
You're funny.
It's because I'm a diehard reader of your column, and I thought your Yo-Yo Ma comparison with the great cellist was fantastic, and so I made a note to make sure that I circled back and dropped a Yo-Yo Ma on you.
Very cute. I'm happy about that. Somebody reads that monstrosity. So
I appreciate it. Still picking through it. To me, it's the Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, and Thursday morning in America because it takes me 4 days to get through it, but I appreciate the Yo-Yo Ma shout out. Brock Purdy has gotten some blowback, Peter, in terms of an ongoing narrative of system guy and Shanahan and the talent around him. At what point does Brock Purdy maybe be able to put that to rest? Does he have to win the whole kit and caboodle to put that narrative to rest?
I really think it depends how these games go. But again, I think anybody who expects Brock Purdy to start to get praised by all the analysts as a top 3, top 5 quarterback in football, you're going to be waiting a long time. It's fruitless. I have watched this happen over and over again during the course of this year where people just, no matter how well he plays, and you guys, you're the ones who coined the term draftism, and I think it's exactly right. When you're the 262nd player picked in the draft and you have a great supporting cast and a really good play designer and play caller, then you're not going to get as much credit as you probably deserve. That's just the way it goes. It's the endless conversation. I think it's absurd, but it is the way it is.
We're talking with Peter King. Insider calls are brought to you by Old Spice Gentleman's Blend Body Wash, providing exfoliation plus 24/7 moisturization because men have skin too. Peter, Amy Trask, who I'm sure you know very, very well.
Course,
we love her. We respect her on this show. We often have similar opinions. We don't on this one. She's going to join us in about 20 minutes. And I wonder what your thought is on this. She did a piece on the Rich Eisen show recently and said that this weekend's games have 7 terrific quarterbacks and Brock Purdy. So it's one thing, right? Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. How would you compare Brock to Baker Mayfield, for example?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to disagree with most of the people in my business. And I've just gotten used to disagreeing with them the whole year because most of the people in this business think that Brock Purdy is the highest compliment they would pay him is that he's a complimentary piece in Kyle Shanahan's puzzle. And, I remember we had this discussion after the San Francisco game, the 42-10 game earlier in the year. And I remember just feeling like anybody who watched that game and didn't think that Brock Purdy was a well above average NFL quarterback, you're watching a different game than the game that is actually being played. So look, I really like Amy. I think she's great, but in my opinion, she's very wrong, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. You disagree with people in the business. But one other thing I would say about Purdy, and one of the reasons why I've gotten to, just as I've observed him, I don't know him well at all, but as I've observed him, what impresses me is that he doesn't give a flying fig about any of this stuff, because in his world, it just doesn't matter. He's used to everybody overlooking him. He's used to not being heavily recruited. He's used to having to go to Iowa State to play college football instead of having one of the big Pac-12 schools chasing him. So he's been used to this. He's used to people not thinking he's very good in the draft. And so, as I've watched him over the years, over just 2 years, as I've watched him, I go back to, and we've talked about this before, when after his first game against Miami 13 months ago, the next team on the schedule is going to be Tampa Bay coming into Levi's. And I said, hey, your first NFL start is against Tom Brady next week. And he said, hey, cool. He's been playing football longer than I've been alive. And, and that's just, he doesn't say, oh, my God, Brady. Oh, geez. I mean, he's a quarterback. Brady's a quarterback. Let the best man win. I just think that's the way you have to handle it. There's nothing else you can do when everybody in the world is saying you're just a guy. It's just, so what? You just got to go out and play anyway.
You look at this rivalry, Packers and Niners, and it goes back decades and generations. And now my partner Mark was pointing this out yesterday about Love and Purdy, this maybe being the new head-to-head matchup. How do you put this rivalry in terms of NFL rivalries that are somewhat storied?
I mean, one of my favorite stories that I ever remember from this rivalry, Mariucci was coaching the 49ers. The Packers came into Candlestick, and after the game, Favre goes over because Mariucci coached him in Green Bay. He loved Mariucci. He loved his family. And he goes in there, and this I hope I'm not going too far afield in telling you this, but after that game, and I forget what Steve's son was named. He's obviously grown and whatever. He's probably 40 years old now. But Steve Mariucci's son, Favre, saw him, and he goes up to him, and he gives them this little vial, and he goes, hey, listen, when you go into school on Monday, I want you to sprinkle this on all the girls' seats. And he looked at him and he said, what do you mean, Brett? And he said, look on the side, look on the label. And the label said fart juice. And he wanted Mariucci's son to go in and just totally stink up his class. So the kid was so excited. Mariucci goes, hey, thanks a lot, Brett. But anyway, that's, I hate to say it, I don't remember that much about the game, but I remember the vial of fart juice after the game because that was Brett Favre.
That's an elite reporter right there. That's a great story.
It is.
Peter King with us here on Willard and Dibs. We're focusing a lot on the quarterbacks, and I actually think that this might be a game for the running backs, Peter, and who can sort of get that first quarter lead and who can average, get that 5 to 7 yards on first down. What are you seeing? Aaron Jones has been on a real streak last 4 or 5 weeks. What are you seeing there, and how do you like that matchup?
Hey, I think you're absolutely right. That could be a gigantic key to this game because the Cowboys couldn't handle Aaron Jones. And it's one of the reasons why, as we go through this coaching search right now, and I see every team in the league is trying to interview Dan Quinn. And look, Dan Quinn is a very good football coach, but I wouldn't want to go into an interview this week after the way my defense played. And quite honestly, the way the defense has played a lot in the last month or so. And so I look at that, but I also look at the fact that the Packers have done a fantastic job in taking what they do well, okay, and they believe very strongly in making it 2nd and 5. They want Aaron Jones to own this game early in games and early, in series. And so they believe in that, and that's one of the things the 49ers are absolutely unequivocally going to have to shut down. I think it's a big game, honestly, for the interior of that defense to really play well on first down.
And how much does the return of Eric Armstead help that? And do you think that the 49ers run defense that was a little less than stellar later in the season, do you think that the rest and getting Armstead back, is that the elixir that they need?
I think it's going to help a lot, especially in a game like this. And quite honestly, in a game, if they play Detroit next weekend, because Detroit's running game has been absolutely killing it, especially in recent weeks. So I look at the next 2 weeks. I've been watching that and watching Eric Armstead's availability, and if he can come back and be 95%, of Armstead, that is a vital return to the lineup for the 49ers.
Peter King with us on Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game, talking out playoffs. And speaking of all of them, and you'll attend 2 of them, who do you think is the livest dog this weekend of the 4 games, Peter?
I think look, I mean, Buffalo is favored over Kansas City, I assume. I'm sorry, I don't look at these that much.
Yeah, by 2.5 is all.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously that would be Kansas City would be the one, because I don't think it matters. I think home field is borderline meaningless this week. When I think about Buffalo and Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, I just don't think it matters. The other game that I think is interesting is, we talked about, I talked about how I really thought that the way that Green Bay played last weekend. They're going to come in absolutely and give San Francisco a game. But I think Houston absolutely is going to give – is this going to be a game in the fourth quarter, Houston at Baltimore? I think C.J. Stroud is fearless, and I think he goes into Baltimore on Saturday and plays very well. Probably wouldn't pick him to win, but I think they're going to play really well.
Do you put any stock into the trend for Lamar Jackson in terms of his January shortcomings so far, or is that just too small of a sample to really put any stock into?
I think it is a small sample size, but there's no question that Lamar Jackson has been a bad playoff quarterback. And now look, when you think about this, you've got to be pretty honest about it, looking at it. The guy has not played a playoff game for 3 years. And so I think you got to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Small sample size, 4 lousy games, and then you look at what's happening this weekend, and you just say, look, there's a lot of pressure on him. But I'd like the position I'm in if I were him. My weapons are a lot stronger this week or this year than they have been at any time in the past. He's going to get Mark Andrews back. He's got a multiplicity of people that he can use. And so I look at it honestly, and I just say, I'm pretty sure it's fluky, and I think Lamar Jackson is going to play well. But I will say this, if he doesn't, the story coming out of that game, if Houston somehow won that game, the story coming out of that game would be as much about Lamar Jackson's failure as it would be about Houston's success.
Well, speaking of quarterback failure, it does feel, Peter, like there's a little trepidation right now with the Niners and Brock Purdy, because the last time we saw him in the bright lights, it was the Christmas night game. He's only played one football game since then, and he was fine.
Yeah.
It was the win in Washington. But with that being so recent in the rearview mirror, what do you expect from him this weekend?
I expect him to pick up where he left off. And the vast majority of this year, he was a prime MVP candidate. And so I don't think he's not the type of guy to be tight, be nervous, or to be thinking, oh my God, I got to play well because the last big game I was in, I was awful. To me, I just think that what happens in coverage of pro football today is that it is so massively overcovered, that these narratives start to take on lives of their own when people will say, wow, how will Brock Purdy play? Every quarterback in the NFL has multiple bad games every year. And I just don't look at it like I would be very worried about it. I think he's going to be fine.
The one game we haven't really discussed is Tampa at Detroit. Do you see the Lions having any sort of an emotional letdown, or does Dan Campbell and his fiery approach kind of mitigate that for Detroit?
That was amazing last Sunday night. I was at the game, and that was as intense an atmosphere as I've ever been in. And seriously, that was unbelievable. But I would ask that sort of same question. They were so emotionally set for that game. You wonder, how can a human being do that 2 weeks in a row and keep doing it until the end of the season? Maybe you can. I don't know. But, man, they had to have expended an awful lot of energy in that game. And I think, honestly, that would be Tampa's best chance, honestly. But the other thing is, Tampa Bay travels. They're basically at a big disadvantage traveling and getting one less day to prepare. Not that it's not that big a deal at this time of year. It's not a huge deal at all. But I think that's one other edge that Detroit is going to have.
Peter, what if you were a GM? You got all these 8 teams playing this weekend. If you had to win a game, which of the remaining 8 coaches would you want coaching your team?
I would say I'd say probably John Harbaugh, because I think that Harbaugh really has figured out the pulse of his team. And look, I think there are some good coaches this weekend, obviously, to be in this position. Kyle Shanahan being one of them, Dan Campbell, but D'Amico Ryans even. But the one thing about this weekend that I think will really show is that John Harbaugh has a really good sense, along with Todd Monk and his offensive coordinator, of how of what buttons to push with their team, how the lineup should be used. There's a lot of older players, particularly on defense, particularly rushing the passer. And I think Harbaugh and that staff, Mike McDonald there, have really figured out a good way to use their personnel. So I like John Harbaugh's ability to influence this game.
Peter, safe travels, man. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Really appreciate it, guys. Take care.
All right, Peter. There he goes. The great Peter King, Odyssey NFL Insider. Insider calls are brought to you by Old Spice. Men have skin too.